Have you ever looked at someone, or let's be honest, even yourself, and just thought, why on earth did they do that? So often we see a behavior on the surface and slap a label on it: lazy, weak, antisocial. But what if those snap judgments are completely missing the point? What if there's a hidden logic, a deeper story that, once you see it, makes everything make sense? Well, let's dive in and find out.
Here's the fascinating thing. Most of what really drives us is happening completely under the hood. It's all shaped by these hidden psychological patterns, this programming we're not even consciously aware of. So in this explainer, we're going to peel back those layers and finally get a look at the real story behind why we do what we do.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the mind's own secret logic. Then, we'll trace some of our behaviors all the way back to childhood. After that, we'll see how these patterns play out in our social lives. And finally, we'll talk about how you can start to reclaim control over your own inner world.
Okay, first step, let's talk about the actual architecture of our thoughts. Because it turns out really effective thinking isn't about some kind of innate genius you're just born with. Nope, it's about building very specific mental habits, almost like installing a better operating system for your brain. And it all starts with this incredibly powerful concept called metacognition. Now, this isn't just about being smart, it's about being aware of how you think. So instead of just accepting a thought as true, you stop and ask, wait a second, why do I actually believe this? Is it possible I'm biased here? Honestly, this one little habit is a total game changer for avoiding really common thinking traps. And metacognition is really just the launch pad. High-level thinkers build on that foundation. They actively, purposefully question their own assumptions. They seek out things that challenge them mentally. They learn that crucial skill of just pausing before having a knee-jerk emotional reaction. And maybe the biggest one of all, they don't see their beliefs as these facts carved in stone. They see them as probabilities, ones that can and should be updated when new information comes along. See, this isn't genius. It's a practice. It's a skill. Okay, so let's see how this hidden logic plays out with a personality type we all know. The person who seems lazy, but deep down, you've got a hunch they're actually incredibly ambitious, right? We see someone procrastinating, and we just assume they lack drive. But the psychology behind it tells a totally different story.
So here's the twist. Their brain isn't resisting the work itself. It's resisting inefficient work. Their motivation gets fired up by the big picture, that future goal, not the boring, repetitive tasks to get there. A lot of the time, their standards are so high that just starting something feels overwhelming, so they put it off. And what we never see is the massive amount of mental energy they've already poured into planning and strategizing in their heads. It's not laziness, it's selective, high-efficiency motivation.
But our internal logic isn't just built on cold, hard reason. It's also built on emotion. And to really understand that piece of the puzzle, we have to go back in time. Because so many of our adult patterns are really just echoes from our childhood. Things that got wired into our sense of who we are and what makes us feel safe.
And this brings us to a massive concept in psychology: conditional positive regard. It sounds like a fancy term, but it boils down to a simple and often pretty devastating lesson that a child learns. My value isn't a given, it has to be earned. Love stops being a constant and starts feeling like a transaction.
Does any of this sound familiar? People who grew up with this rule don't ask themselves, am I loved? They ask, am I being useful? Getting help feels wrong, like you're going into debt. And there's this constant, low-level fear that if you stop performing your function, you'll be replaced. So you become an expert at ignoring your own needs, all just to keep that feeling of connection.
And this dynamic often creates the easy child. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a compliment, right? Oh, she's such an easy kid, no trouble at all. But psychologically, being easy is often a really complex survival strategy. It's an adaptation, not just a personality trait.
The easy child becomes a master of emotional suppression. They just bottle everything up. They learn to handle everything themselves because they don't want to be a burden. And they start to believe, deep down, that love is tied to being low maintenance. And here's the tragic part. They get so good at seeming fine that nobody ever thinks to check on them, which only reinforces their belief that, yep, they really are all on their own.
And look, if any of that is resonating with you, that deep feeling of being overlooked, I really want you to just let this next thought sink in. It is such a crucial reframe. The problem was never a lack of worthiness in you. The problem was a failure in your environment to see that worth and reflect it back to you.
Okay, so now let's take these internal blueprints, our logic, our childhood programming, and let's see how they actually show up in the way we interact with the world and with each other. So for example, take people who cry easily. Our society is so quick to label them as weak or fragile, right? But psychologically, the exact opposite is often true. They aren't weak. Their emotions are just closer to the surface. They're actually processing their feelings in real time instead of bottling them up until, they inevitably explode later.
And what about people with very few friends? It's almost never because they're antisocial. Much more often it's because they just have higher standards. They're sidestepping the shallow surface-level stuff because they're looking for a deeper connection. They're also often very self-sufficient and more sensitive to social burnout, meaning they just need more alone time to recharge their batteries. It's a sign of depth, not a social failure. This whole idea of adaptation can even explain entire generations. Just look at Gen X. Their trademark skepticism and fierce independence aren't just personality quirks, they're direct psychological adaptations to growing up with way less supervision, economic instability, and massive technological shifts. So what might look like cynicism from the outside is actually a quiet, hard-won resilience that was built over decades.
So for our final section, let's pull all these threads together, the hidden logic, the childhood programming, the social adaptations, and bring it right into the modern world by looking at one very specific, very current behavior, the decision to intentionally disconnect. But first, we need to understand a key brain function called hedonic adaptation. Basically, your brain is wired to get used to any source of pleasure. That little rush you get from a like or a new follower, over time, it fades. Your brain needs more and more of it to feel the same little kick until eventually it feels like nothing at all. And that is exactly why people who delete their social media aren't running away. Their minds are actually evolving. Their sense of self-worth grows beyond needing that constant drip of external validation. They realize their focus, their cognitive bandwidth, is just too valuable to waste on an endless scroll. They are consciously breaking free from the digital conditioning and making a shift from being passive consumers to active creators. And that's the real story. Leaving social media isn't some angry tantrum. It's a strategic choice. It is a conscious, intentional reallocation of your time, your focus, and your energy toward the things that actually matter. Deep work, real connection, and a quieter, more authentic inner life. So to wrap it all up, what we so often judge as a personal flaw, whether it's laziness or being too sensitive or being distant, is often just a psychological adaptation. Our past quietly writes the script for our present, and true understanding, both for ourselves and for others, only starts when we finally learn to look past the surface behavior.
And that really just leaves us with one final thought. Now that you have this new lens, who in your life, and maybe that includes the person in the mirror, will you start to see with just a little more clarity and maybe a lot more compassion?